Hi, everybody. Welcome. I'm Barry Kostrinsky. These are Artist Talks. We do this every Tuesday night. This talk will be recorded. It will end up on my website, actually on my YouTube channel, and access will be through the website. Tonight, we have Bonny Leibowitz coming in from Dallas, Texas. Thank you, Bonny. Bonny will present about her work, her installations. I believe the current show, maybe the current show. I'll leave the details to Bonny. All I'll say is you're in for a treat. Bonny works with a mix of materials and does installations that are quite fascinating. And I would say very much your own language, Bonny. And a big part about art, I always say art is a language. And, artists often create their own language. And, Bonny, you excel at that. Even though we have had other artists present whose work is similar, similar to be miles away. And the other artists that were similar are miles away from your work, but let's say distant cousins in a way. We also have Mo Kelly modeling for us. She's on 2 screens here. We started this about 2 months ago, and the idea is 3 screens. That's right, 3. That's right. The idea is, can you draw? Can you be putting the effort and the energy to draw, and at the same time listen to a presenter, look at her art, and then respond? And the idea is to activate, and I used to say left and right sides of the brain, but it may be more than that. It may be forebrain and back brain. I'm not really sure, but it's, get the stuff moving in between the ears and see how it works for you. So you're welcome, obviously, to draw Mo. And if anybody would like to contribute to Mo, you can reach out to me or to her. And, just thank you, Mo, beforehand. Next week, we have Deanna Dawn. Deanna's going to present on neurographic art, something new and interesting. All this information is on my website. You can see it. And then after that presentation, we'll have our last one of the year. And I'm going to go back to a looser open format. I'm going to put it out to people to talk about whatever they want for 5 minutes. I mentioned it to Michael Krasowitz, and he was like, let's have everybody recite a poem. And instead of being strict, I'm going to say to Michael, you go ahead and recite a poem. Somebody wants to talk about their art, whatever anybody wants to do. I like the idea of sort of like a party, so to speak, something loose and informal. And of course, whenever you do that and whenever you play, it gets very serious very quickly in a very good way. So, Bonny, welcome. Thank you for your time. Bonny is a very organized artist. She has put together a series of slides. Just welcome and thank you for your time. And everybody else, keep in mind, feel free to jump in, ask any questions you like at any time, and as well to use the chat if you want to say anything, or just to, sort of shout it out. We like the interactive nature of the talks. So, Bonny, thank you and welcome.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for having me here. And I do welcome questions as I go through the work. I really appreciate any interruptions. That's super great. And then after I run through these slides that I have here, I might also show you, we were talking before we recorded about, pandemic and times and how I did installation during the pandemic time. So maybe you'll remind me of that, but I'll start with our presentation. So this, I'm starting out with my most recent exhibition. It's titled Behind the Scene, and that's S-E-E-N, scene. So thinking about what we encounter and then how we perceive things, what the concepts are, our interpretations of life around us, and how they might be very different for each person, what we project on the piece. So these concepts in this exhibition deal with social constructs, how we name and title things and separate them from each other, and like for instance, you might say a wave or a cloud, and how those words and descriptions around anything are so defining. And when we know things are all attached, but we have to use language. And then, so what's behind that language in our presentation and how we perceive things. So right now you're looking at, like I said, the most recent installation behind the scene. So this was a fairly large space, and I've been working up over the years to build into more and more of installation work where it's becoming more of a surround. And I'm moving forward with that since the show too. I've just really started developing some new ideas around installation as well, that moving forward. But these are fairly large pieces, but you know, you can see it's a large space, so how it kind of dwarfs some things. For instance, the piece on the left here, this what I call cloud as an object, that's 5 foot, just that one piece. So I don't know if you can see where my cursor is moving.
If you can, Bonnie, let me ask you, when you create these pieces, do you create them as individual pieces and then assemble, or do you create them with the whole in mind and sort of pre-draw up some sort of relationship?
Yeah, that's a good question. I usually work on work as a series, so I kind of have a construct in my mind of what they're about so that they do happen to all relate. But I would say that most of these, all of these work as individual works. And so you will see them in the future images. And that's a lot what I want to talk about, is how these pieces end up relating to one another and how they take different forms in different exhibitions. So thank you, yes. Here's a little bit of a close-up on that. Again, you can see this is a painting on the wall, and it is on a very heavy paper, and I've collaged onto it and painted on it. So I love to do 2D work as well. This particular piece has imagery from Hieronymus Bosch's Garden of Earthly Delight. A lot of my work has felt more Baroque, I guess, in nature to some degree lately, and maybe for a while. The pinks and the golds, and someone commented recently, my installations feel like walking in a painting, and I liked that. There's some in here, this white piece next to it is a latex, which is like about 4 or 5 foot of latex that was pulled from, I found ways to make materials, use materials that resist other forms so that I can make skins of them. And there's rawhide and foam and Tyvek. So I'll talk a little bit about these some more. I also use found objects like lots of branches and things like that. Pieces in nature. And so I'm really enamored with nature and trees and developing from nature, but I'm also interested in using materials that I can make mimic natural objects. I mean, I don't know if that's like an intention as I'm working so much as it's a consequence of the work. You'll see that in future images, that some of the materials that I use, they disguise as a natural object that you would be like, I don't know what that is, but it feels like something I'd find in nature. So here's another view, close up of one of the areas on that wall. And this is another view from underneath some of the pieces from another angle. I was able to hang things from the ceiling there. They had this nice grid. There's another angle in the room. So this is on the right here. Well,
are you painting these objects? Are you using paint to paint the colors? Or are they?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
No, I just gonna say, or are they, you know, when you said latex, is the is that the color that the latex came in? Or are you painting on it?
Yeah, so these pieces in this image are using some various materials, I'll tell you. So the one in the top left is Duralar, which is just a Mylar, and I've cut many strips of it, and then I heated it, turned it, burned some of the edges, and then tied it all back together with monofilament, and then I put some pink acrylic on that. The large tree form that's on the ground is an actual tree root, and I did paint it with acrylic, and then there's also some two-part epoxy on it that I painted this like green color here. The little piece on the wall here is actually, I don't know if I have a close-up in this presentation, of a rawhide that I've shaped and painted, which you can take rawhide and wet it and form it, and it will retain its shape once it dries. This piece down here on the floor and this pink one jutting off the wall are both a combination of, they started off originally with a spray foam. So in my studio a couple of years back, I made a gigantic pile of like all kinds of stuffing and trash, and I put a big tarp over it. And that tarp I knew would resist the foam. I'd be able to pull the foam off, and I sprayed all around that foam, making a giant mountain shape. And that was about 15 foot by 15 foot by 10 foot. And what I did was I took a knife and cut that up, and now you're seeing parts of it. So that's about like 5 foot. This one's about 5 foot. From that foam, I then painted it. I added a 2-part foam, which is kind of that you can add a color into, and I did. So there's the pinks and the blacks on that one and the greens, but I also used acrylic on there as well. And then you'll get a close-up of this one on the floor. That one's called the heart, and that one has a branch in it, and I did paint that with pink. And this one hanging is a branch. There's a little tiny one on the top that has foam, and it's a little Tinkerbell type shape up there. So yes, I'm adding the colorant, you know, to the objects.
Bonnie, would I be right to say there are no straight lines in your work and that your work is organic?
That's right. I've tried to, I mean, I like linear work too, but I am, yes, drawn to organic forms. And I feel like in the forms themselves, even though they're not body, I do think about body. I think about nature. I think about figure. My history is figure painting, figure drawing years ago. And so I feel like they're body-like. They have a sensuality in that sense.
We saw this in a photograph last week by Linda Tralla, who presented her photograph of a nude next to a rock actually looked like the rock had a knee. And so I think if you look, you know, I think that I always say a consilience of form. There is in the human body, in nature, in a leaf, in clouds. And when I try and draw, it's all the same form and line and curves that are used in almost every form. So if you do it right, and I know right's the wrong word, but if you do it loose enough and open enough, you'll see the human body in a tree. You'll see all these consilient forms. On the other hand, if you do a Mondrian with the straight lines, that's all you're really going to see. You'll see the intellect, or, you know, you'll see a thought and not so much an object, but a good object will play many roles.
That's a good way to put it. And I did see her talk, and yes, there is that relationship where in the work. And so, yes, I'm glad you can see that. This is a little bit closer up of that one area, and you could see probably the tree branch in there a little bit better on the ground. There it is again. And I have some branches sitting on there. I like this one. It just, I like just finding pieces. If I take walks, and this one on the top sitting on here is just look like a big foot, kind of like that. And then this is where I'm seeing some things happening for the future with me in installation. Is I do a lot of monotypes too, some 2D work, but I don't feel like just speaking about like linear and organic, I don't feel like painting on a rectangle and then the rectangle being in the same space would relate. But I've done some things with like hanging monotypes. And so my next, idea, I just like took some of my monotypes and photoshopped them into this image, would be to like very lightly have a organic, just maybe on organza, painting on organza or something, and then like just floating some of these from the ceiling where there would be movement, motion. And so this is just me, just wanted to show my process of kind of thinking ahead. I don't always do everything in Photoshop to figure it out, but in this case, I was like, oh, I wonder what that would look like. So there's that. So I want to like move here and show you a little bit, like walk down a road of where I have so many albums or portfolios or exhibitions that you can look on the site, but I just picked some things that I could take you along a little journey of history to see how the work kind of evolved. So again, please ask questions if you like. This one is from an exhibition that I had, and this piece is called Suspension. And I started off working, well, I shouldn't say started off, we're starting here, working just very abstractly. And I really felt, I think there's kind of a fun but sad story in it, is that I was working in this way, just really making what I felt were like full of depth and meaningful abstractions. And I was talking to an artist friend at the time who said something to me like, and I felt like, oh, everyone could read into like my deepest felt moments in this piece, and what I was assuming everyone could possibly read. And so he happened to say something to the effect of, your work could benefit by, and then I swear I don't even remember what the next thing was, but I was just so like taken aback that like this wasn't coming through, like the message I thought was coming through, that it just took me. And I think that was because I knew it deep down. I knew I had to make a move in the work that would be more specific and be more personal, but not necessarily, but more universal personal, but to have more of my story or a narrative to some degree in it and be more explicit. So that was like a big turning point. I have lots of turning points, but as I'm sure we all do, but that was one for me in my work. I then started incorporating some photography into my pieces. These are like 48 by 48, and I would print some things out, enlarge them, and I started relating some things in nature to body. And so here are the Da Vinci drawings, and then I, was making those forms in relationship to different roots and veins and mushrooms and fur. This is imagery of fur, the pink area, and then this big milkweed pod I was using a lot in my imagery at the time. And so I was kind of building a history, looking at my art history, and looking at nature and body and what was important to me. And this piece is called The Question.
Bonnie, I did like the piece that you showed before, But this piece, it goes a little deeper. It gives me it's not that it's got to give me more, but they're both very fine works. But this piece has a depth and a complication and something that I could look at over and over again. The other work is very nice, no question about it. And I could keep looking at it because you'd see different forms, but it's that combination of the anatomical and then the tree and then your sort of form there. I think at first I was going to say, no, Bonnie, your thing is installation. But when I see a work like this, I'm like, you can do two-dimensional and you don't need installation at all. That's obvious. I think it's great that you can do both, actually. And this piece, it has a lot. It really has a lot in it.
Yeah, thank you. Well, it's hard when you have a lot of loves because I do love 2D and 3D. And that's how, like, tearing the paper and making it dimensional and still painting and including that in a, installation has worked for me. But thank you. Yeah, I like hearing that feedback, And then this was another piece from that time. It's called Continuum's Edge. And these are banyan tree roots, which I was pretty crazy about. And then this is Peter Paul Rubens and this piece down here. I don't know if you could see these little figures, but it's been a piece that I have been crazy about. I think it was, maybe that's the Rape of the Sabines. I'm trying to remember the name of it, but it was just, I love the motion. And then I would take, again, some photography. So like this top image here is feathers, but, bird wing, but it's not, I didn't cut it out around the wing and, make it a wing shape. I'm using shapes that felt right for the piece. This one, we're in a whole different color zone, but again, the banyan tree, the fir, I was doing the monotypes and cutting it, putting on board, but you can see how I started coming off the board a little bit more and more. This one is called Fur plus Bone.
What are the dates? And did this work precede the three-dimensional work?
Yes, this was all prior to the 3D work, and it was about 2012.
Okay.
The piece in this series, the last one I'm going to show you in this series, is called Engage. And this is where my brain started thinking about 3D because I really like this milkweed pod thing. And I was started to wonder what it would look like if I made this into a dimensional object. And I started to feel like, gosh, I mean, it's hard to say this, but I started to feel like it would be more real, whatever real is, because there is none. But it felt to me like I needed to be making objects. And so my next thing was I was going to build this milkweed pod out of plaster and see what would happen to it, but that's not what happened at all. So what happened next was this piece, which I know it's not in context, it's just on a white background, but it's about 5-6 feet it covers of ground. And so the plaster piece became this kind of body-like shape. And I kind of thought it was kind of sickly, but kind of pink. And so there was still life in it. And I put the branches in. It took so many different shapes and I had to cut it open. I hated it at one point and I cut it open with a saw and then put different pieces back together and then use these bed springs and paint. And it just, I ended up calling it the Temptress. And it just made me think about what if you were out in the woods taking a walk and you found her on the ground, like still living, still kind of not. And it started making me think about, archetypes and what does that mean? That the aging and having a little bit of life and it being a bone and not a bone and, you know, being found and kind of spilling out. And so this started me on a whole series that I ended up calling Flight of the Pleasure Pods. Flight of the Pleasure Pods, not easy to say. So the whole exhibition was these archetypes. And so I'm not going to show you all of them, but again, they're on the site, but I can show you what happened in this series.
Bonnie, I do want to read from the chat because Olga Alexander asked a good question, as all of our questions are. First, she says she loves the installation that you showed before and asked about the gallery, but she asked an interesting question. She mentions the installations seem to unpack the painting. Was this intentional? And I'll add, or is it just that you're comfortable in both forms and it's going to be you, whether it's in a two-dimensional object or a three-dimensional construction? So are you consciously unpacking a painting, or is this just happening organically?
Organically, definitely organically. A lot of times I'll like pick up materials and hold them next to each other, and this feels good, this feels right. And I think there's just something that one thing feeds off another as you're working. And you know, when you're in that zone and it's like, oh yes, I have to do this next. I have to go look for bed springs for this temptress. I have to go. So I don't feel like I give myself maybe an assignment, but it just feels like once I'm in this idea, you know, again, this was the archetypes, then boom, you know, I'm working that way. So, but I like the idea of unpacking the painting. That's very much so, because you could think about like these forms that were previously in the 2D painting are just like spilling out into 3D forms. I like that concept as well.
And Bonnie, I like how you explain that. There are ways to work where you sort of map it out, like Seurat mapped out, did 100 drawings and then did a painting. And the painting, and I've heard artists express this, actually becomes like a pain in the neck to make. On the other hand,
right,
the route that you're taking is another route that a lot of artists take. You do something and then you listen or you look. And if you do it right, again, I shouldn't use the word right, but if you do it harmoniously, you will hear the piece direct you to something else. And so in this way, you're following a line, but it's a line that you're listening to as opposed to defining as you go. And I think that leads to a lot of creativity. I will say, Lori Horowitz mentioned that she loves the 2D reliefs, fabulous work. And in some of them, her coloration came to mind as well. You at one point hit oranges that right away made me think of some of Lori's work. I've always seen similarities between the two of you. And I can't help but notice in this image that's up, you mentioned Bosch, the big shape in the top left is very much like that, one of those weird shapes that Bosch has in the Garden of Earthly Delights. I don't know if it's an eggshell or something.
That is a good point. Yes, I know that one shape you're talking about very well. Yes, that's a good point. But yes, I don't like the idea of like planning something out and then it's my job to like fill in the colors either. You know, no, I like the connection. Yes, exactly as you expressed it. This one is called Love Muffin's Unofficial Monument, and also about 5 foot, 4 foot by 5 foot. It's on a cube. There's a plex box down here. The top of it is foam, maybe layers of like mattress foam, and then underneath are branches kind of stuck. So I kind of thought of it as like this body of a person. And then there's all her kind of past loves there, like in this decrepit state underneath. And like there's no way for them to get out because she's like hanging over the top of, there's no no air. So it's kind of all stuffed down, and there's this history, and there's kind of like trapped memories, like, just our, I should say our, because I thought of it as memories of like just your history, your relationships, what you stuff down, what you keep secret, what wants to bubble up and come out. And so that's Love Muffin. And that's
Also,
her.
the top image there does read like a brain to me, at least.
Yeah, I was thinking of it as flesh, just like flesh. But yes. So, and then this one is called The Diva and Her Deflated Ego. And this one, the image on the ground, which is hard to see, but that's photography that I've printed out and shaped. And in the one image is Caravaggio's Narcissus. And, he's looking into the pool, seeing his reflection. And this is the diva and the deflated ego, relating to, things that happen in our lives that knock us down, or, aging, or being up on this pedestal and not. So that's just some of what that's about. And here's a installation shot of her. And I like this one because at the exhibition, somebody was standing there, and it was like perfect, because she was mirroring, her body was mirroring that piece so well. I even asked her what she was thinking about. She was like, I was just wondering what's going on there. And so I really liked that shot. This one is called Assisted Living. Again, like talking about aging. And this was just this big burl piece of wood that I found. And then I put it in this very light pink plaster kind of form. And, I have these tubes, surgery, I guess, tubes coming out of it in this medical cart. And then this whole series, so this one's Queen for a Day. And I found this little, I was on eBay, and you know how one thing leads you to another. And I found this beautiful little antique footstool. And I thought, how funny, like somebody actually would buy a footstool like that. Like they'd have to have that to put their feet on. Like even your feet have to be on something very special. And so anyway, I put together some elements in this, and that's Queen for a Day. But when I was making this series, so I thought to myself, I would really like to have somebody speak about archetypes or write about the work on archetypes. I wish I knew somebody who could write on like some Jungian archetypal conversation. And so I got online, I looked in Dallas, there's a Jungian center, and I thought, I'm going to look for somebody who could do that for me. And I found somebody, and oddly enough, I didn't mention, I'm a teacher, and the person that I found top of the list was a Jungian psychologist that was actually in my classes.
Yeah.
So I was very fortunate, and I just said, Donna, would you do this? And so it was awesome. And she wrote a bunch of essays about the work. And then when I gave the artist talk, she came down with me, and I'm not kidding, this artist talk went for 2 hours. We went around from one piece to another. People were talking about the work, their personal histories, how it relates to them and their lives. It was so fun. And then I had somebody in the exhibition, I had her I made what I called pleasure pods, like these little foam balls. And then she would I didn't want them all to be given away really quickly. So I had her she would just covet them and hold them, and then maybe give one away or roll it, or somebody go to reach for it and she'd pull back. So all of that having to do again with archetypes. And here's one of the little pleasure pods there.
Well, I'll say for sure, Carl Jung would like the synchronicity that when you went to look for someone to do it, that person was already in your class. That's like double Jung in a way.
Yeah. I love that. It was just okay, that's amazing. How could that happen? But yes, it was good. So moving forward to some of the work more recently, this piece is called Conduit. I'm using a tree root. I'm very fortunate people bring me these crazy objects, and I haven't had to go digging in a lake yet, but it was from a lake. It was about 7 foot wide. And I built this, I had this metal base. It's pretty heavy, so I had to have something fabricated, and it's a rusty base. And I have a certain covering on that, like an epoxy that I painted after, and it kind of felt a little bit outer spacey. This is cloud as an object. It's one of the pieces I showed earlier in the, that I said was about 5 foot in that giant wall.
Bonnie, I do want to point out the last image that you had up, that the image on the bottom is a lot like the Duchamp rack in one of his pieces. And it was also in some of your other work. I don't often, give praise to Koons or to Damien Hirst, but some of your objects, certainly with the medical-like table, makes you think of Damien Hirst in the best way, in the best ways. And then also some of that gold, and whether it was, I think, the footstool, makes you think, and certainly the Roman column, that makes you think of Jeff Koons and some of the work. And I know, I say this often, it's not that you're relating to these artists at all. You're pulling it out of the same river, the same source, the sort of, you keep mentioning archetypal, and you're right. These are archetypal images, whether they're culturally specific or they're actually even deeper than that is another thing. But I think you're doing something similar to what they do when they're doing their best work.
Oh wow, that's great. And yeah, the like, especially when you think about a column, I mean, it immediately makes you think, of a pedestal of like how something is held in reverence and why. It's like, but why? And so yeah, that's a great connection there. I appreciate that. This
Can you talk about how you go about attaching these things to the wall? That's attached to the wall, right?
It is. It's so what I do, and if we have time, I'll go to another picture on my site, but you can imagine it, I'm sure. I put a flange in the wall, like a pipe flange,
Yeah.
and then I put a pipe into that. So it's like, it usually is a 1/2 inch, and then that is just hanging on that pipe. You can't see where it's hanging.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, from the side you'd be able to see it, and I like being able to see. Like, it's hilarious to, like, you have this cloud, then you move around the side and there's a pipe holding it, where it's just kind of humorous to think of, like, the actual mechanism showing, and that it's not a cloud, it's just a manufactured.
Yeah, you're not trying to hide it. Okay.
There it is in context with the other. That's again the painting on paper that I tore. That's my workaround of not doing the rectangles in my shape, but still being able to have paintings. And I like that it's draping onto the floor. And this is the one that was on the floor in that exhibition, but in a different context in another show. This is called The Heart. Again, this is also on 2 pipes, 2 flanges, 2 pipes, but you don't see it. It's a shame because underneath this, it's pretty interesting too from the underside.
Given the scale of your pieces, and what to do with the work, Olga Alexander asked, for those of us who do installations, we eventually have to deal with what to do with the pieces. What do you do with your installation pieces, and how large is your storage space?
Okay, so this is perfect timing for this question because it is overwhelming. So I have I have a couple studios. I have 3 studios. And the one that is my personal main one that I don't have any teaching in at all, though I use the other spaces as well, is about 700 square feet. So while all this work was out for years, I've been dreaming about having this done, because when, let's say I want to photograph my work, right? So I have to take my work to a space, find a space that'll let me just photograph it, not for exhibition, put it up for a day, photograph it, bring it back, because my studio is not that kind of shape, was not in that kind of shape to photograph the work. And then so I'd have like one day, and then I'd be very frustrated because, oh, I would have moved it, I would have photographed it differently. So for a long time, I've been like, wish I could like just, you know, work on my space and get it in better shape. So while this work was out, and I had another show at the same time, you'll see, it's called Super Unnatural. So I had pieces in 2 shows, and my studio was basically empty. So I took half of this, all the stuff, and I put it on one side, and I had a wall put up, and I had the floor done, and I put in better lighting. So I created a space that I'll be able to like work in, photograph, think about the work, and that kind of thing. So when everything came back, it was like, what the heck am I doing with all of this? So I went through, I got rid of everything I didn't need, you know. I had this incredibly large easel. I had some marble bases, things I could just give away. So I did that. And then I took every single thing that, you know, I could and tucked it underneath tables. I put it in buckets. Because I want that space available. I don't want to just go ahead and fill it up. So now that I can photograph it. So yeah, so right now I'm on full, but everything is tucked away. And I also had a few pieces that were up in a group show in Philadelphia at the time. So everything came back. So far I'm just able, and what's really nice too is I do reuse my pieces like in future exhibitions. So it's not like I'm just always making new, I am always making new work, but I can still use the pieces that I have and change them up. So I did that for the most recent show. And so, yeah, it's tough. I mean, you have to have the space.
Yeah, I think that's it in a nutshell. I mean, it's tough. It's hard enough dealing with paintings that are on stretchers, but when you look at an object like this in the center, you know, that's quite an object in terms of volume.
Yeah, and one of the nice things about the other studios that I have is that they're teaching studios, but I have the walls. So I have everything up on the walls on those studios too. So altogether about 2,100 square feet. So I'm fortunate in that way.
So you don't have the, you're taking up the walls in those teaching spaces with your work. And so what happens with the students?
The student work, is that right?
Yeah, I said, what happens with the students' work?
Mm-hmm. So the students, they come, they might make things, and then they take them home. And so, but I do have a hallway in the back so a lot of my students are working on painting. And then that hallway, while they're in process, I will keep their work so that when they come back every week, I just pull their pieces out for them. And then I also have students, like I do one-on-ones. So those one-on-ones are usually, you know, like maybe 3 days they'll be here and we'll be working on some installation or project or 3D, whatever they want to work on. And then they'll be taking that stuff home. So
so the piece in the center here, does that then come apart when you go to take it back? How is it, you know, this is always the sculptor's big issue on showing work and how do you transport it and then how do you store it? Barry opened up that door. But what does this come completely apart? How does that work?
No, and I imagine you have some of those issues, Babs.
Yeah.
This one does not come apart. It's one piece. It's almost, I guess it's over 7 foot. And right now, this and the green one are the ones that are sitting on my studio floor that I'll have to find a place for. But the others I've managed to tuck away in spaces. So when I transport my work, when I have an exhibition, I'll rent a van. The last one, again, this last exhibition, I rented a 15-foot van and got people to help me load it. It's not, like, this piece is not heavy, but it's crazy to try to get through doorways and get out into the van.
Yeah.
And it's not a van, it's a truck, 15-foot truck. And
I know, I understand.
yeah, not fun to drive either. They're so
I
loud,
know.
clanging. It's not.
Bonnie, when you're teaching, do you find working with students informs your work or does it deform your work? And by that, I mean, does teaching actually hurt your creative process?
Oh, I don't think so at all. I think it adds because you're being forced, like in this talk, you have to talk about your work, you have to talk about their work, you have to be super in tune with what somebody's doing. And that only helps inform what you're doing because, oh, how can I express it that this person understands what I'm saying? You might say something and you're like, oh, it's not hitting. How could I say it another way? And I think that can only serve to help and be interesting. Sometimes somebody will say something or they'll tell me about a supply that I'll get hooked on, or they'll see, they might arrange something. I would go like, why would you do that? And then I look at it again and I think, that makes sense. So I think I really gained by it. It's really, I like the dialogue. I like the one-on-one.
Bonnie, I have a suggestion for you. It's Lori Horowitz. Hi.
Hi, Lori.
Hi. In these larger pieces, because I find myself in the same kind of problem with these larger pieces that come together. Finding these sort of natural spots where they can be taken apart and reassembled so that the seam, a seam won't be seen. So basically engineering them as you're making them so one piece fits into another and then can be detached from it. And that's what I've done in the past for like fairly large pieces. So just a thought.
That might be something to think about. I haven't had that issue yet. So like I'm able to put this piece, like the big pink cloud, I was able to put away. The big tree, I really don't want to cut it up because it's just so beautiful, and I don't want to like reattach limbs to limbs with something that it would look, I don't know, not at this point, but that is a way that a lot of artists, do think about taking things apart, storing them, putting them back together, or just making them naturally that way. But I did not make that branch. Nature made that, and but something to think about for sure. Thank you.
There was a Roxy Payne installation at Madison Square Park, and for years I worked at that corner of 26th and Madison on that park, and it was fascinating to see how that big tree came in and how it was all put together. I don't know if you've seen any of his giant trees. He had the one up on the Metropolitan, but then he had the one in the park, and it was, talk about an engineering feat of how far in the ground they went and just the construction. But then there's another artist, I think it's Ugudu, or I can't remember his name, who literally purposely takes the trees apart and then puts them together in these kind of awkward, there's a number of artists doing that. It's not something I'm ever interested in, but it is, there does get to a point like where if you're going to get larger, I think you're still at a point where you're not large enough to worry about that. But if you ever really wanted to go large, you definitely have to You have to
Absolutely.
figure that stuff out. Mhm.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that is so true because I am thinking about getting larger, and I have been playing with like having different parts of trees from different trees adhere to each other and successfully with different epoxies, and like I just think that's again very interesting and humorous. But yes, how like another artist that does that is Tara Donovan. I don't know if you know her.
Yeah. I mean,
They're
there's
almost like jigsaw
unfortunately,
puzzles.
yeah, unfortunately, there's several people that are doing it, so there's never been any impetus for me to want to do it because I'm thinking it would look like what they're doing. I'm not
Yeah.
interested in doing that, but it is the whole bit about storage and breakdown and how things go together is, one of the sculpture's main issue. So it's a fascinating challenge. I think Eddie was talking about that last night where you think, oh, why am I doing this? Because they are so complicated. They're complicated to install.
Yeah.
And they take specific instructions. So I'm going to lead you back to one other question. Sorry, I'm taking so long here, but when you're doing these, you mentioned earlier in your talk that you change them as you go along. They come in and out, like you had one that was on the floor, then the next thing you're showing it to us, it's on the wall. Do you consciously want to do that they change their positions, that changes how you see them once you suddenly you're taking that piece that was on the floor in one installation and now I'm seeing it attached to the wall? What is that something that you're thinking about constantly doing? And are you just each time you go into a space, you're organically reacting to the space? How do you plan your shows? Like something's going to come in. Is it a piece that's going to be a hanging piece and that's the way it is? It may look different in every setting, but it's going to be a hanging piece. Or do you regularly do this where you change what happens to the particular piece?
I love that question. Yes, what I've done is particularly want it to change. So and that's what I'm going to show you with this one too. So like for the last show, so the time before my last show, I had a lot of these pieces at University Mary Hardin Baylor. This one was at Collin College. It's called the Art Gallery, and so I just felt I wanted to make a different mood, a different feeling. So I actually took the pieces, and when I took the layout of the gallery, and I did a little Photoshop rendering of where I was going to put the main pieces. So. And then I knew that I wanted to change up kind of the flavor of them. And so I added lots of paints that made them more vibrant and dynamic. So yes, I do feel like I want them to change up and grow. And I don't feel like they have to forever be that thing and only displayed in that way. I like the change.
It's almost like they're living in an organic sort of way as they move along and you're reacting to them. It's a different time and space, and now you're reacting to it in a different way. It's like it suits your whole organic way that you work. Like it just keeps growing.
Right. Thank you. Yeah, I just feels natural to do that. And so the pieces are changing while I'm changing, the view is changing, how they're seen is changing. This is that piece in a previous iteration, and all I had to do was change the way that I hung it from this monofilament wire. So it's called I Used to Live Here. So it was a net. It can be like this nest shape.
In the first iteration, the one where it's more vertical, it almost reads like a slab of beef, and it makes me think of, I don't know if it's a Francis Bacon or if it's a Chardin, but it's some piece. And again, I think you're hitting archetypal imagery here in the best ways. I do want to mention Tara Donovan. I don't know if it's a guy or a girl, because often I see art and I really don't know the artist, but I saw the exhibit at Pace where there were stacked solo cups, like millions of them.
Right.
And it was a memorable show, probably 10 plus years ago. And I think one of the great artists of our time, able to work with simple materials and make these incredible, really make a lot from nothing or from something regular. And I will say, when you were talking about, how do you go larger, ceramicists are often limited by the height of the kiln. And so if, let's say your kiln's 26 inches or whatever it is, if you want to go larger, a ceramicist sometimes has to think of making pieces that sort of jigsaw together or then are glued or shaped. So they have to deal with scale and in a similar way. They have to figure it out.
Yeah, very much so. Very much so, yeah. And then again, here it is on the wall here. This is another piece. It's called Belonging, B-E, and then Longing. And so this has a lot of materials in it: plaster, wire, foam, Tyvek, mulberry bark, and then this lovely little foam piece at the top. Again, like I'm using materials that, like, I know some will stick to themselves and some will separate. So some of this foam I know won't stick to encaustic. So I put it on the encaustic, then when that cools, I can just pull it, and it makes all these interesting shapes. And then, so that piece and this piece, which is, oh gosh, tons of stuff, vase shape. And I sometimes like to burn things. So it's Yupo and that I've painted and then heated, and some vase shape and different yarns and wools and dyes and foam and rawhide, and sewed all of that together in a bunch. And then you'll see this one and this one together are this piece down here on the floor. So added a lot of hot colors to it. And then this is that outdoor installation I mentioned that was happening at the same time. It was an invitation. There's a Iris Bechtel who has Terrain Dallas. So she started this I think Terrain has been an organization or a platform that's been happening. I think it started maybe in Chicago, I don't know, but during pandemic, she opened up her space to these funky shows in basically her front yard in this area that, so during pandemic, when people couldn't go indoors to go look at exhibitions, there were exhibitions outside. So I thought it'd be really interesting when she invited me to see what would happen. Like, I chose some pieces that I wouldn't mind. I want to see what the heck's going to happen to them. It's 1 month out in the weather. And it was crazy because right at the beginning, right when I set up, we had these crazy storms, like super thunderstorms. And so these pieces, that some of them were foam and other materials, and then what would happen to them. So we kind of took pictures over time, and these standing pieces here ended up being shaped by nature like this, and I love them even more. So they dried out, they just kind of wilted and bent, and then the sun, the heat, 100-degree weather dried them out again, so they're in a kind of a new shape. And then here's a close-up of one of them. So so that's basically all of my images. And then if we have time, I can show you that other, if we don't, we don't have to. I was just going to show the images of how I did an installation in Photoshop of work during the pandemic. But
no, go ahead. I will also say, usually I don't love it when images run that quickly, but I sort of liked it in yours. We gave them all a nice, slow look. And then when you run them through,
Uh-huh.
it's sort of like you see the similarities. I know it becomes jumbled, but our brains are really quick. It is actually able to take that in, and
Right.
it might not be the worst sort of animated, version of your works. Something totally different.
That's
Uh,
fun.
but it is fun. It's fun to look at your colors. I see the browns and I see what I would say is a little more morose coloration. But I've learned, you go bright, you go orange, you go colorful and happy and pink. So you have two different palettes that I feel you work
Right.
with at times.
Right. Very much so. Yes. Good observation. So let me see if I can switch to another share.
I will say one thing, whenever you stop screen sharing and I'm drawing, I'm like, wow, the model is large. And I try and draw furiously. And it's sort of also without knowing when the model is changing shape, it's like the old drawing exercise is to, you start with a 5-second contour drawing, then go 20 seconds, a minute, and you learn to like mark really quickly. And it's a way to like activate a deeper part of your brain. And I see it when we do this, that it gets me going in my little sketches.
That's awesome. It'd be fun to have her in the exhibition, modeling in the exhibition and then draw in that environment, that would be fun. So this series is all Photoshop work. So all Photoshop. So during the pandemic with the, cancellation of exhibitions, and I was just very frustrated that I didn't have any place to show my work for me. So I this first started, I was at my son and daughter-in-law bought a home, and they were taking all the wallpaper down, fixing up, remodeling before they got actually totally moved in. And so this was all the wallpaper, like they had scraped off, and it was all over the floor, and it was so beautiful. And I was like, can I bring my piece over and hang it from inside and photograph it? And they said, well, no, we're fixing the place up. We're going to have somebody, we're doing this stuff. And they weren't that keen on that, which is awesome. They were fine, because what happened was I said, okay, I'm going to photograph it. And then I photoshopped my work, this hanging piece from the ceiling there. And so that gave me the idea to ask other artists to send me pictures of any place they wanted. I reached out to people and I put it on my social media. It could be a mundane place, it could be an exciting place, it could be formal, it could be nothing, it could be trashy, but I don't care. Just if you want to send me a picture, I'm going to Photoshop one of my pieces into your work. So I was very fortunate. I got a great response.
I love that. Especially with that wallpaper. I had the same thing of houses that we've remodeled and stuff, and I'm looking at, when you pull it off, that whole abstract piece of work that's underneath, essentially the wall itself, it becomes a piece of art. But this is wonderful. It almost could be like a mock-up for a actual installation that you then go do.
Yeah.
In a way, it becomes it just is the idea. You say, this is what I'd like to do. And then, I don't know how you'd make old walls, but you'd figure out like ways to get old sheetrock and weather it and do all that stuff. It's a fantastic idea.
Yeah, that would be cool. Yeah.
As an installation, just put the wallpaper up, and you have to get like old wallpaper, or could it be all kinds of pieces, and then you scrape it off and all the scrapings become the piece. It could be fabulous.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, love that. You could even go to people and ask them, like, while you're remodeling, just give me your old trash,
There you go. That's how you could do it. Go over and pick up the trash bags of the stuff, and then you could recreate it in another way.
And then the different wallpapers could be interesting too, like what that says about that time period, you know, some 50s wallpaper or whatever. And then, yeah, I love that. But I could also see, like, just in general, maybe that's a different subject, but I'd like to do an installation in some like old cathedral or, you know, some interesting place with character like that.
Just get a gig at the Venice Biennale and you'll be able to
Okay.
find one of those places to do that. There you go.
Well, anyone who wants to hook me up, I'm
Okay.
in. Okay. That would be awesome. We could do that together, Babs. So this is a couple more pieces, and this is in my friend Joey Brock's home, or his studio, was his studio. This piece, Deborah Kapoor sent me that image, and I put my cascade there. Sorry, this one is at a construction site, obviously, and that's my pieces, the big black pieces hanging there. Jumping ahead of me, this is the heart, and my brother had taken this beautiful photo, the night sky. This is Jane Cornish Smith. It's a, let me see the details. So it's, what do they call that? On it, oh, an Airstream, her Airstream trailer. And so I made my piece kind of coming out of that trailer.
You know, what I like best about this, Bonnie, is, you know, you hit a problem, you hit a snag, you hit COVID. You even hit a problem with, you know, your son saying, no, you can't use our space, but you went ahead and you didn't stop there. You went ahead and you went virtual and you took images and you overlaid, and then you reached out to other people, and, you know, you evolved your work, you know, in a very positive way. You got another iteration of what you do. So problems are not dead ends for artists. They usually will open a deeper door if you let them.
I like that. I like that. Thank you. This was Diane Tenerelli's. So she had moved. She was not happy. It was Christmas, and she was sad that she didn't have a lot of Christmas decorations out, and she had posted this image, and I was like, send me that. I'm going to make you happy. I'm going to put some decorations on your house. And so that's what this one is. This is another friend's home, and I did that from looking up from underneath. That's another piece with Tyvek.
Oh.
There's my love muffin, and she's now in a giant park. She's giant in a giant park. And my brother-in-law had this one, and that was like a camping trip. And I was like, oh, that is so crazy. So brought my piece into that one. Piece on the shore. This one kind of reminded me like some Kiefer old kind of burnt out place, and I put my little tiny piece right there. Some more iterations. I think this was Melissa Rubin. Yes, Melissa Rubin has this giant warehouse space that was just gorgeous. I was like, oh my gosh, that's a studio. Thought that was a beautiful little shot. This piece, actually the round piece is a skin that I pulled from a tree. Like I just put some wax on a tree and then covered it with the foam and pulled that off. So that's the skin you're seeing. And that's that. Yeah. Thank you.
That was beautiful. I think that enriched us all. There's no question about it. I mean, nobody's saying anything, but we got a lot from that, Bonnie. And I think that's how we feed each other as artists. You know, there's a lot to digest. It was cohesive. You know, simply put, it was beautiful work. It was, you know, I personally enjoyed it very much. I really did.
Thank you so much. It means a lot to me. I really appreciate it, and I appreciate being able to share that.
That was wonderful, Bonnie. Thank you.
Thank you, Bev. Thank you all.
I'll take the gold piece for my birthday.
All right.
It was 2 weeks ago.
Oh, okay, I'm behind. I've got to rush it. I'll ship it out.
I'm just kidding.
I know.
I want to thank Bonnie for such a nice presentation, such an in-depth one with so many images and iterations, really beautiful. Of course, Mo the model. Mo always, if anybody wants to contribute, you can reach out to me and I'll give you her information. And, you know, all of you for making comments, but Babs, I got to highlight you. Thank you for all the thoughts you injected, for all the questions. I think it's best when we all do that, when we, you know, I can get bored of myself. And I think we hear each other, and I think often we say things that we're all thinking. And it's very nice to sort of to be together, B-E-E, be together. I do want to point out, Bonnie, how you mentioned words and labels, and it is very restrictive. You didn't go into it much, but I don't think we realize how we sort of squash things down to nothing when we put a word on it or a label on it. And one thing I learned when I was living in the South Bronx, this is a very sad thought, but a lot of the people don't have the language to express ideas. And, you know, I've gone as far as to say, do you really have the idea if you don't have the language to express it and you keep using 3-letter and 4-letter words to express something? Now, you definitely have the idea, but you don't flesh it out unless you have the words that go with it. And no matter how many words you put in, you're not going to recreate the reality, whatever that is. There's no question reality is deeper and richer. But I was at a friend's wedding, an artist, and there was a poet there. And when he spoke, he was not speaking the language that I speak. He put so much intention into the words and the sentence structure. I realized in the best way how ignorant I am and how possible things are when you go in deeply. And, you know, he loved his language and the words. And so he made things rounder than I ever could. And I think as artists, you know, we work with form, with line, with color, maybe with emotions, with energy, maybe with nature. And that's our language that we sort of sculpt and put together. And, you know, we make something beautiful that is often, you know, I think it's often beyond words. You know, the old line, a picture's worth 1,000 words. It's worth so much more. And the pictures that we create that are, you know, in a way, they're all obtuse because they're so different from what we see, but they are archetypal. So they're all familiar at the same time. So thank you for presenting. These talks are every Tuesday. Next week will be Deanna Dawn talking about neurographic art, something that she's just discovered. And I think we're on some sort of trend here where we're exploring whether it's Jungian psychology or something that's deeper and richer. And it's sort of interesting how none of these talks are really planned in association with other talks, but somehow there was always that causal link, that sort of Jungian synchronicity that comes out. So thank you. One more round of applause for Bonnie. Such a beautiful presentation. And thank all of you for coming and participating just by being here. Everyone have a great week. Thank you.
Thank you, Bonnie.
Thank you.
Wonderful work. Loved it.
Thank you.
Okay. All right,
Yes,
Bonnie,
yes,
great seeing you. Great seeing
Thank
Barry
you.
and the rest of the gang. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bonnie, can I ask you a question? Are you still here?
Oh, yeah, I'm here.
So do you make what's the word I'm looking for? I'm having an older moment. How do you sell the work, basically? I mean, I don't know.
I guess
You make a, whatchamacallit, like a lots of different, what's that fancy word that artists make?
oh, you mean like,
Photographs of their-
sorry, what was the word?
I don't know, what's the fancy word for making photographs of a word?
Oh, you mean like a G clay?
Print, a print.
Print, okay.
You sell
So I
prints or-
don't sell prints of my work, I don't,
Oh.
but